As the saying goes, when an anti-fan is speaking, you know that he is lying. And when an anti-fan is quiet, it's because he is lying to himself. Here we have a list of historical revisions that are quite popular, and you are going to encounter them when traveling on various forums. And I want to help you debunk them, because it's very important you do not allow these falsehoods to go unchallenged. First of all, Captain America literally fought Nazis. He is the embodiment of fighting the alt-right. If you didn't get that, you didn't get Captain America. While it is true that Captain America did fight Nazis, it's interesting that they omit the fact that he also fought communists. And Captain America was a champion not of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He was a champion of freedom and liberty. In other words, I highly doubt that Captain America would have enjoyed cancel culture. And there is a very popular story within the Marvel comic books, that of Civil War. In Civil War, superheroes and villains battle it out, and in the chaos, school children get killed. So the government comes up with this concept called the Superhero Registration Act. In other words, common sense superhero control. And guess which side of the argument does Captain America finds himself on? It is Tony Stark, representing corporations, that is in favor of common sense superhero control, while Captain America literally brings violence in order to prevent the government from taking away his God-given rights. So I don't think you really understand Captain America, because that's not who he is. If you think, oh, he is fighting the Nazis, therefore he must be Antifa. The Punisher isn't meant to be a role model for police or armed forces. So much so that the writers of The Punisher made him actively speak out against it in a comic. If you didn't get that, you didn't get The Punisher. I was never under the impression that The Punisher is supposed to be a role model for police or armed forces. What I do know is that The Punisher was written in a time where crime was rampant in the United States cities. And as such, it was very cathartic for the reader to pick up a comic book where criminals get their comeuppance. This is why The Punisher is popular, because you see criminals getting blown away. It's very similar to RoboCop. It's very similar to Dirty Harry. There was an entire cultural trend in the United States back when you had that high crime rate, because the government thought that we need to be more understanding to criminals. The police needs to learn sensitivity training. The criminal is just misunderstood. And because of that, when you think that criminals are the victims of society, society becomes the victims of the criminals. And the average person starts to enjoy reading a comic book where the Punisher solves the problem. Deadpool is queer. He is pansexual. If you didn't get that, you didn't get Deadpool. I don't remember when Deadpool was released that Marvel went, it's like, hey, we got our first pansexual superhero. We got the best writers in the world to write about a guy that puts his pee-pee into any hole that exists. Isn't that amazing? Don't you want to buy this comic book? Oh my god, this is so forward thinking. We should get a Nobel Prize for it. Never before in the history of mankind has such a superhero been written. People are going to enjoy reading this particular comic book for eons to come. No, Deadpool, while of course he was pansexual, that wasn't what defined him. He wasn't written because he was pansexual. It doesn't even make his identity. Among other things, he happens to be pansexual. If Deadpool was written today, it would have been like the hype that I gave you a little bit earlier. Star Trek is about equality for all genders, races, and sexualities. As early as the mid-60s, it was taking a pro-choice stance and defending women's rights to choose. One of its clearest themes is accepting different cultures and appearances and working together for peace. It's also anti-capitalist and pro-vegan. If you didn't get that, you didn't get Star Trek. Well, Star Trek was always shit. to be honest. But I kind of disagree with what you're saying, that there is equality between all races. I mean, the Prime Directive itself acknowledges that there are backward people out there, and the best thing to do is to leave them the fuck alone. You know, build an imaginary wall to prevent them from mixing with the other civilized races. That's what the Federation actually did. Why do you think they wouldn't interfere with the poor folk when they found a planet that didn't have warp capabilities? As for Star Trek being pro-choice, I don't know if there was a woman that was in the 3rd trimester and gone to the doctor of the starship and asked for an abortion, and the doctor went like, okay, let's yank it out. Let's scramble its brains. Right? I don't know whether or not that episode exists, because I haven't seen all of them. But from what I have seen, I don't think that's the case. Superman and Supergirl and a whole other host of superheroes are immigrants. The stance of the comic is pro-immigrant and pro-equality and acceptance. No. The comic is about truth, justice, and the American way. And secondly, Superman is a legal immigrant. Legal. He got adopted. Zod, General Zod, is an illegal immigrant. Illegal. He violated the law, the first thing he did when he came to Earth. And as a matter of fact, you know, due to General Zod's existence, one may make the argument that a good screening of the aliens that come on Earth is required. Which also gets us to X-Men, being about civil rights. It's kind of true in a way that, yes, X-Men is about civil rights, but it's not done in a patronizing way. It's not that all mutants are good, all humans are evil. No, it makes it quite clear that there are good mutants and bad mutants, and it's also realistic that some mutants are very dangerous. In fact, even the good mutants, like the Professor, ended up killing a lot of people because he had a stroke when he was old and suffered from dementia. So it is an interesting conundrum that is being presented. It's not preachy. It doesn't offer solutions, which is why people like it. In fact, I would argue that this is the reason most people actually like these comic books, is because none of them are preachy. None of them tell you the correct thing to do. All of them just pose a moral dilemma, and it's up to the reader or the viewer to decide which is the correct stance. And finally, this is one that really pisses me off. Stan Lee said that racismus and bigotrismus are amongst the deadliest social ills plaguing the world today. If you're bigoted or racist, you didn't get any of the characters Stan Lee created. So the problem with this is that, number one, Stan Lee was also against woke-washing characters. He said that he wouldn't want a black Peter Parker. Why don't you pull up that quote? Why don't you pull up the quote where Stan Lee is talking against cancel culture? And not to mention, like, the progressives, the social justice activists called Stan Lee a racist. And they were dancing on his grave. Some of them, not all of them. They were doing this on the far-left extremist platform called Twitter, if you guys remember. It was shortly after he died. So, this is cherry-picking. And by the way, right-wingers are also against racismus and bigotrismus. I mean, if you look at the American Constitution, a very old document, it says all people are created equal. And that was the foundation, the building block that justified the abolition of slavery. I know that when the Constitution was made, slavery still existed. But using the argument in the Constitution, they managed to abolish slavery. Something that is not really mentioned by progressives. They kind of create the idea that the left invented that all men are created equal. But in reality, it's the American mindset. The founding fathers, they're the ones that invented the equality way before the left even came up with this concept. So anyway, they then say that geek culture isn't suddenly left-wing. It always was. Yeah, well, it depends what you understand by left-wing. All right, I am pretty sure that if you pick up a leftist person like Obama when he said that he opposes gay marriage, you would consider him to be far-right. Even though at the time, in his first term, when he opposed gay marriage, he was a leftist. and quite the most progressive, one of the most progressive leftists of his time, right? But if you had a time machine and you took Obama with his worldviews from that time and you pull him today, all of these Antifa people would consider him to be a far-right extremist. So make sure you challenge this bullshit whenever you see it on forums. Do not allow it to propagate because it's a bunch of lies. And it bases on the fact that people haven't read the comics and they don't know about what they're talking about. Being for equality, not being a racist and not being a bigot, this is not things that are exclusively to the left. Being a person that's for freedom and liberty can also mean that you're for all these things, and you can still be called a bigot by modern progressives today on Twitter. The main problem with entertainment today isn't necessarily that it's left-wing or it's right-wing. The main problem is that there is no creative freedom. You actually see game developers at Rockstar saying, well, we're remaking GTA, but we're removing this from the game because now it can be considered offensive by a modern audience. Right? So a game that was so popular, so famous, that everyone around the world knows about it, apparently nowadays is not good enough. And in order to make it good enough, you have to remove stuff from it. Okay, that's a problem. Secondly, is the preachiness of it. Back then, comic books considered the reader intelligent enough to understand the undertones themselves. Nowadays, everything is spoon-fed to you. Nowadays, you're being dictated. This is good, this is bad. In fact, they often use villains in order to use right-wing talking points, and they use superheroes to promote left-wing talking points. Anyway, right, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.